For the longest time, I've been wanting to make a DIY gilet. Now, I did attempt it back in autumn last year and it went really wrong. There was a couple of things that just wouldn't work out and I learned a ton from it. So I thought, well, once spring comes around, I'll try it again and I'll see how I can put that newly gained knowledge into action and create a stunning gilet. Turns out, I've not actually learned that much from the failed project before, so this is basically a video of how I explain to you the mistakes that I made making my own DIY gilet, so that when you do yours, you learn from it and you can do all the right steps and you do end up with a wearable gilet. Now, the biggest mistake that I made was choosing the wrong fabric. I went to this beautiful shop in Leeds that is selling scrap fabrics from companies, and I found this gorgeous brown faux leather, which I instantly fell in love with, and I immediately thought, this is what I need to make my gilet out of. Now, the problem is that faux leather is not designed to be clothes. Instead, it is designed to make upholstery, bags, so anything that doesn't actually need to be comfortable and wearable. So when you do choose the fabric for your DIY gilet, I would recommend you either search for a faux leather that is actually meant to be turned into clothing, or instead you don't use any faux leather and you use just some jacket material. Now, I did think the DIY gilet worked out quite well and all of the steps that I took were roughly the right ones, but once I had finished working on it for about 30 hours, I realized that when I'm wearing it, it is incredibly noisy. So noisy that you would never be able to wear it anywhere because people would just wonder what the heck is going on. So I do love the look of it, I just won't be able to wear it. Now, the first step you have to do to achieve that DIY gilet look is download the Clark Code pattern from Mood Fabrics and print it out and to trace your size. Now, I basically traced the size and then I had to reduce it down a little bit just because the coat is meant to be oversized and I didn't have as much fabric for my gilet, and I also thought that a gilet isn't technically meant to be so oversized. It is meant to be somewhat figure hugging. So what I did is I took the pattern and I just reduced the middle of it down. So I basically took the shoulder seam off my traced patterns and then pleated them so that I reduced them in overall size without distorting the armhole curve. And really all that is left to do then is cutting out your pattern pieces for the lining as well as the outer fashion fabric. I changed it up a little bit because I did create some belt loops, which are just little rectangles, and I also created a belt which is just a very long rectangle. I did shorten the pattern as well because the Clark Code is quite long and I only wanted my waistcoat to just go over the bum. I also didn't use the pockets of the Clark Code just because I wanted a different style of pockets. I followed 2 different tutorials for that, which I will link in the description below. I basically created double weld pockets from the inside, but then instead of having the actual weld peeking through the outer fabric, I used a different method where I just top stitched a pocket overlay onto the coat. Before going ahead and assembling the pattern pieces to become the coat, I actually traced some old bedsheet lining, I think it is, to use as the facing for my faux leather pieces so that I could pad them without having the padding going everywhere. Now, if you buy padding from the shop, you won't have to do that. I, however, upcycled an old pillow and because I had to rip all of the filling apart, it would have just flown out everywhere and it wouldn't have stuck to the pattern pieces. So of course I had to basically create pockets for the filling to go in. So I just pasted the bedsheet lining onto my faux leather pieces and then left a bit of a gap where I can push all of my filling through. Once I have done that, I've closed that hole so that nothing would fall out, and I then used a ruler to trace a diamond shape onto my filling that I would then top stitch down for a quilted look. I chose the diamond quilting based on the preference of my Instagram followers. Now, that is a lot of work. It is honestly Really difficult to do because my sewing machine is not industrial and it is quite thick, and with the leather and everything it took a lot of strength and willpower to be pushing those layers through the machine. So again, I would say if you use another fabric that isn't a faux leather or a much thinner faux leather, you will not be struggling as much as I did. I then had to cut a quick hole into my filling layer so that I could push the pockets through there. They are then kind of like sticking out through the filling. We will be covering this with a lining anyway, so that's not a problem, but otherwise we couldn't have quilted the patterns as we would have had to sew over the pocket pieces, if that makes sense. So that way they are completely separate from the quilting. Once I had quilted all of my pieces, including the collar, I then started assembling the pattern pieces as it is described in the Clark Code instructions. Just bear in mind that we don't have sleeves, of course, since it is a gilet, so you're not going to be attaching any sleeves, cutting out any sleeve patterns or anything like that. We're just skipping those steps entirely. It's really not that difficult. You basically just attach the shoulder seams, the side seams, attach the collar to the outer layer, you attach the lining pieces just like that. Now the part that I thought was really tricky was inserting the lining into the gilet, mainly because of the armhole area, because you can't just simply sew it right sides together. You would have to start with one side, sew that right sides together, and then for the other side I basically seam ripped the shoulder and side seam of that lining on that side and then attached the armhole right sides together to the outer layer, put it back in, and then sewed the shoulder and side seam back together. It was a bit of a kerfuffle and I would probably do it a different way this time around. I'd probably just attach it all right sides together and then top stitch the armholes by just folding in the raw edges and top stitching all the way around. I think it would have made a cleaner look. It probably would have just worked much more easily. But yeah, you live and you learn, and you can of course choose whichever way you think is the most easiest to do. Because I was using faux leather, I also had to top stitch quite a few of my seams that I created. Some of the seams I created based on just the amount of fabric I had available and the way I had to spread the patterns out, but also things such as once you have attached the lining pieces to the outside pieces, because the faux leather was so stiff, I had to top stitch the entire coat so that it would actually fall nicely and not look really bulky. If you use other fabric, you probably won't have to do that. The last step after I attached the lining to the coat was then to simply fold in the raw edges at the bottom of the gilet and then just top stitch that down as well. And then it was finished, and I had spent lots and lots and lots of hours on this piece just to be extremely brokenhearted and disappointed that it was all for nothing. It is the way it is. Here's the final outcome. I love what it looks like. It just really is not wearable, unfortunately. So make sure you learn from my mistakes and maybe do a little more research before you purchase your fabric. And apart from that, thank you so much for watching.